When you think of the PS1, you might remember collecting gems as a purple dragon, or having to complete an impossible checklist of card tricks in a parkade, or your first zombie encounter in the most needlessly confusing mansion ever built. When I think PS1, I get flooded by memories of the Eiffel Tower blowing up, sneaking around in the snow while a guard follows my footsteps, and running around a graveyard as a skeleton with one eye. Of course, I'm thinking of Twisted Metal 2, Metal Gear Solid, and the game I want to talk about today, Medievil. In my opinion, Medievil is as essential to the PS1 as GoldenEye is to the N64. No collection is complete without it. Though I must admit, I've never actually finished this game before recording for this video. The first time I ever played Medievil was on a demo disc I'd gotten with a magazine subscription. But when I booted that demo up, I remember being in absolute awe. I remember watching that intro cutscene where Daniel gets zapped alive and just thinking, my Nintendo 64 could never achieve this level of detail. The sound of that wisp and the reverberated speech in the crypt was breathtaking. That little intro cutscene and part of the crypt has become a core memory for me.
It has risen again! Sir Daniel Fortescue, see? The hero of Gallowmere who fell at the first charge.
The best way I can describe Medievil is that it's a gothic-style hack-and-slash adventure. It was released in 1998 and developed by SCE Studio Cambridge. In the beginning, Medievil was pitched as an amalgamation of Ghouls and Ghosts by Capcom and the art style of Tim Burton, more specifically The Nightmare Before Christmas. Upon its release, Medievil was received kinda positively. The reason I say kinda is that despite an average score of around 80%, I couldn't find a single critic who outright loved the game. They all seemed to agree that it fell just short of what other games were doing and only earned its higher score for its style, puzzles, and humor. GameSpot praised Medievil on its unique look and puzzles, but criticized the bad camera, stating, tighter camera control would have been a necessity. Computer and Video Games simply said, it looks nice and plays okay. A reviewer at Edge magazine stated that Medievil is well crafted in some respects, underdeveloped in others, praising the game for its ingenious feel, but criticizing the levels for feeling like simple cases of maze navigation. I'm confused. Medievil scored high overall, but based off these reviews, it seems to be the perfect case of, it's good, but... And now I'm genuinely curious to see how accurate these reviews are, and even though I absolutely love the game, I'll try to be as unbiased as I can. So let's jump right in. Does anyone remember Medievil? The story of Medievil is your typical good versus evil story, with a few extra layers added in. Legend says that after a long bloody fight, Sir Daniel Fortescue was able to vanquish the evil Zarok before succumbing to his mortal wounds. His sacrifice leading to an era of peace, in which he's dubbed the hero of Gallowmere. But in reality, Fortescue got hit in the eye with an arrow on the very first charge of the battle and died. The king covers up the truth by spinning the above tale, while Zarok just goes into hiding. Cut to 100 years later, Zarok returns and casts a spell to raise the dead and plunge Gallowmere into an eternal night. His goal is to steal the souls of the living. However, his spell inadvertently resurrects Sir Daniel Fortescue himself, who is then tasked with taking down Zarok once and for all. I like that the story is a little more complex than we fought before, so we must fight again. I like to think that, along with taking down Zarok, you know what? Apparently I can't say his name, so I'm just gonna call him Matthew from now on, or Matt for short. How's that sound? I like to think that, along with taking down Matthew, the plot also revolves around Daniel proving that he's a hero after all, proving that he belongs in the Hall of Heroes. And there are some growing pains. Daniel isn't some stone-cold action hero who knows he has plot armor and is ready to get down to business. He displays a range of emotion, always grunting "oh no" at a task he seemingly doesn't like or angrily telling people to get on with it. He even gets offended when anyone mentions his jaw, or eye, or arrows in eyes, or jaws. I guess what I'm trying to say is that he's not a perfect protagonist like Link or Mario. There's clearly shit he does not want to do throughout the story, but does anyway, because that's what heroes do. They really managed to inject this living, breathing human element into Dan, who's a long-dead, reanimated skeleton. So the game starts in Dan's crypt, where immediately after waking up, two gargoyle heads will immediately start talking shit to you.
The fog of war and the shrouds of time conspire to turn the arrow fodder into the savior of the day. But we knows better. Let it alone. Fate has given it a second chance. A chance to...
These two are recurring characters throughout the game. Actually, you know what, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm pretty sure it's just the same gargoyle, twice. After they're done talking, a gate opens and you go out into the larger area of the crypt, and it's a very small stage, but it's a very effective and efficient mini tutorial. It teaches you sprinting, jumping, life bottles, and the purpose of runes, all without holding your hand or forcing you through dialogue or unskippable cutscenes. It even teases you with a section of wall that's clearly different. You need to come back later with a club or a hammer to find out what's behind it. Psst, it's a life bottle. After the crypt, you come up to the graveyard, and the graveyard is, well, a graveyard, but it's the atmosphere that really sells it for me. The music, the shambling zombies, the purple sky, the lighting, the severed hands running around, the heavy gothic design, and that creepy angel statue. All these elements come together to make for an awesome and extremely memorable opening level. The graveyard is where you're introduced to health fountains. You stand in them and they very slowly fill your health, and if your health bar is full, they fill your life bottles. Life bottles are essentially Medievil's one-ups, only you don't necessarily have to die and go through a death animation in order for one to be used. As soon as your life bar empties, a life bottle automatically tops you up again. I really like this, as it doesn't stop the action. Anyway, the graveyard is a short and simple level, just don't forget to grab the chalice on your way out. And speaking of chalices, this is probably a good time to mention the Hall of Heroes. Each level contains a chalice of souls. You need to fill it by killing monsters, then find and collect it. Doing so will send you to the Hall of Heroes after each level. The Hall of Heroes is essentially a large, musty room filled with snobby statues.
Fortescue, you jawless arrow magnet, what are you doing back here? Huh? What? Call me Mr. Woden the Mighty. How I pity the people of Gallowmere, that their fate should once again be in the hands of a chump like you.
If you're so high and mighty, why don't you get resurrected? One thing that bothers me is almost every time you go there, a gargoyle head will talk to you. The dialogue can be funny, sure, but mostly it just feels like they say nothing, and the only purpose they serve is to slow you down.
It's the Hall of Heroes shopping mall. Bargain hunters should check out the ground floor. Well-to-do shoppers should check out the upper floor. That's where it's at.
The Hall of Heroes is where you get better weapons and power-ups, everything from a flimsy, fast-firing crossbow to a massive hammer and a magic sword and shield. But the best weapon in the entire game is your own arm, hands down. See what I did there? I'm joking, but it's funny how, as an option, Dan can rip off his own arm and swing it at demons and zombies. In reality, it's useless, outputting less damage than the base sword, I'm pretty sure, but it's silly and it really fits with the game. In total, there are 20 chalices for you to collect, and while most are great, some being necessary to beat the game, getting a few hundred gold as a chalice reward is gutting, as some of these chalices are really annoying to get, plus never once did I find myself in dire need of gold. Another example of a disappointing reward is the lightning. I was told it was very powerful yet limited. Here, listen.
I know you have the heart of a hero, Daniel. Now we must show the others. Would you like to take my magic lightning bolts? I don't have many, but they're very powerful.
So that's what I was told, so naturally I saved it till the end boss to get a leg up, and it did next to no damage, so there's no point in even saving it, just use it to your heart's content. Oh, and for the record, I got 19 out of 20 chalices on my playthrough. The only reason I didn't get all 20 is that I couldn't figure out which level I'd missed. The map screen said I didn't collect it on certain levels where I most certainly did, and vice versa, so I just decided to cut my loss and move on. The first major milestone of the game is getting to the Hilltop Mausoleum and defeating the boss inside. To do so, you have to go through Cemetery Hill, and it's a relatively simple level. You just have to get to the top of the hill, dodging boulders along the way. That being said, this level contains an item that's very easily missed, yet incredibly important. And that is the Witch's Talisman. Without this, no dragon gems, thus no dragon armor, but I'll get into that in a moment. You find the Witch's Talisman in the Witch's Den, and the entrance to which is behind a boulder you need a club to break. Quick, say witch 5 times fast. I don't know why, but one of the first things I always remember about this game are the 2 boulder-spitting gargoyles at the top of the hill. They were just always so cool to younger me, and I don't even know why. Maybe it's that when you get to the top of the hill, they look at each other and die, or their voices. I really don't know, but it's always one of the first things I remember. And after they do die, you go into the Hilltop Mausoleum. This is where you fight the stained glass demon, and one gripe I discovered very early on is that you have to double tap the D-pad to run. On one hand, this makes sense. Some people still may have only had that classic Dogbone PS1 controller. You know, the one without the analog sticks. But on the other hand, it's irritating and it makes my hand sore. Another thing is that I couldn't for the life of me understand why they separated your movement into 2 different speeds. However, by the time I got to the mausoleum, I understood. Certain areas are easier to navigate at a slower pace and others are impossible without running. Even so, double tapping is still janky and led me to many deaths, and I'm ashamed to admit just how far into the game I was when I realized I could just turn on analog control and sprint with the joysticks. Side note, this is what that big square red light and the analog button on the PS2 controller was actually for. So after defeating the stained glass demon and beating the return to the graveyard level, the game branches off into 3 paths. I call them the pumpkin, the asylum, and the main paths. With these paths opening up, I'm starting to realize that Medieval is a much larger game than I initially gave it credit for. First, you have Scarecrow Fields, and this level represents the first difficulty spike you're likely to encounter. Until now, we've mainly been fighting zombies and imps, but Scarecrow Fields adds in, well, scarecrows. They may sound like a pushover, but they're not. They charge at you while spinning and can kill you very quickly if you're not careful. You can kill them, however, even with the base sword, but it takes a lot of hits to do so. And they'll likely almost empty your life bar before they go down. On top of the scarecrows, you have crazed farmers, imps, and mechs. Yes, mechs. Oh, and crows that the scarecrows release for some reason. Beyond the enemies, this level just bombards you with stage hazards, windmills, grain crushers, whatever these are, and the corn? Anyway, even the fields themselves. This is a very interesting concept. There are monsters in the fields that you can't see, but will insta-kill you if you stray from the path, and if you stop and look, you can actually see plumes of dust across the field, presumably from these monsters. It's actually a really cool level. After that, you go through the Pumpkin Gorge on your way to the Pumpkin Serpent boss, and there isn't a whole lot to say about either of these levels. They're both linear romps through a pumpkin patch. Even the Pumpkin Serpent, who's less of a serpent and more of a giant faceless pumpkin, is easy to beat. You simply stand back and unload your crossbow on him till he dies. Unlike the Pumpkin Path, the Asylum Path is much more difficult and a bit irritating at times. First, the Sleeping Village. This level is very non-linear and tasks you with a few minor fetch quests. The caveat or gimmick to this level, well for the first half at least, is that you can't kill any of the axe-wielding villagers. If you do, it actually subtracts from your Chalice of Souls. However, once you get the bust, the villagers get replaced by these ornery French skeleton soldiers that you can kill to your heart's content. This level just, again, has so much atmosphere, and it's probably one of my favorite levels in the game. In contrast to the awesomeness that is the Sleeping Village, next is the Asylum Grounds, and it's not a hard level by any means, it's just extremely tedious. The whole level revolves around this character called Jack of the Green. He poses 4 riddles for you to solve in order to move through his maze. Thing is, he thinks they're so fiendishly difficult.
So fiendishly difficult.
So perplexingly complex.
So perplexingly complex.
That no man has ever solved them. Where, in reality, they're so incredibly simple that a YouTuber covered in Cheeto dust pretending to be an exotic bird solved them instantly. So he gives you a riddle and you run around the maze to find the solution. As I said, they're easy, but that fucking clown riddle is complete bullshit. It took me over 10 minutes to complete that one alone, solely because walking is too slow and running kept getting me stuck on the geometry of the level. I'd get to the mask 1 millisecond too late only to fail, then I'd have to reorient all the other masks again only to fail once more in the same way. And while we're on the anger train, the asylum itself is no better. Room after room of seemingly endless enemies come at you. In the second room, so many enemies spawn that it causes the game to slow down. In the third room adds my favorite, bats, along with charger zombies. Medieval, have some mercy. This level is an absolute endurance test, and you had better be prepared. I honestly don't think this level is possible without the hammer or the broadsword, but even if you have those, you're still gonna take a beating. Once you get to the last room of the asylum, you rescue the village's mayor and collect the dragon gem. And while we're on the topic, the only purpose the pumpkin and asylum paths serve is to get the 2 dragon gems that you'll need in order to get the dragon armor from reptilian Sean Connery later on.
Really hot.
And I'm just gonna get this off my chest now. The dragon armor is one of those extremely incidental items that on paper seems way cooler than it actually is. Sure, you have infinite fire breath, but it's not that effective and it takes way too long to kill anything. By now, you most likely have the magic sword, which is an absolute powerhouse. Add on to that the fact that you can't hold a shield with this armor equipped, so you can't protect yourself, and it's not even the most powerful weapon at your disposal. At this point, you're probably wondering what the dragon armor is even good for. Well, I'll tell ya, the dragon armor is only used for 2 things: getting through a wall of fire and pushing 2 stone golems off a ledge. Yep, all that work, the pumpkin path, the asylum gauntlet, and the riddles, that fucking clown riddle, all of that for 2 uses. But I digress. Now that we have the 2 dragon gems, we're on to the main path, and holy shit are there ever some frustrating levels up ahead. Starting with the Enchanted Earth. This level is actually my least favorite in the entire game. All of the enemies have these ranged acid spit attacks that are irritating as hell and hard to see, let alone dodge. Plus there are these frogs that are very hard to hit, but don't count towards the chalice anyway, so fighting them is a waste of time. Basically, you gotta contend with all this foresty, naturey, acid-spitting bullshit, then you release the shadow beasts, and add another layer onto what I'm dubbing the 7-layer bullshit dip. I hope you brought your tortilla chips. At the end of it all is a boss fight against 2 winged demons, and the fight isn't really difficult, it's more frustrating. The demons fly around while shooting at you and tilt the platform you're fighting on. And even when I sprint at the right time to avoid falling, I still somehow just get sucked into the abyss. See, that's the thing about this boss. The demons aren't even the hard part. They play second fiddle to the arena itself. And look at this shit. I beat the boss, yet I still died to a boulder. What the fuck? But oh, we're not done with this hellscape yet, because the Enchanted Earth contains a hidden level, the Ant Cave. And man, is it a frustrating mess. It's pitch black and super easy to get lost. This wouldn't be too bad if it weren't for one thing, the camera. I don't know if I've mentioned it yet, but the camera in this game is the absolute worst. Up until now, it hasn't caused any major issues. But in the Ant Caves, it's almost impossible to keep track of where you're going and where you've been when the orientation of the whole damn universe keeps changing on its own. The camera isn't exactly Mario 64 bad, but it's close. Anyway, your objective is to grab some amber for the witch and save some fairies. But now that I'm thinking about it, chalice aside, the Ant Cave doesn't really serve any purpose aside from padding. I mean, if you save all the fairies, you go straight to the Hall of Heroes, and if you collect all the amber, you get the turkey leg weapon, which granted is great, but it's not exactly a game changer. So you could realistically skip the Ant Caves altogether, and I wouldn't blame you if you went through your whole playthrough without knowing this level existed. With the Enchanted Earth behind us, we're on to the Pools of the Ancient Dead, the level where my frustration reached its absolute peak. In concept, the level is amazing. To have a level take place over an old battlefield with rusty swords, shields, and old dead bodies and shit? Hell yes. But the pitfalls make it an irritating mess. By now, I've learned that I can more easily sprint with the analog stick, which is great, but it's easy to go too far and slip off the pathways. And there are these heavily armored knights that you can't kill by regular means. You have to push them in the water. And these guys are... wait, narrow paths, pitfalls, dudes you can only kill by pushing them into said pitfalls? This is basically Lethal Lava Land from Mario 64, only darker and sadder. Anyway, later on in the level, you have to fight flying enemies in order to get the chalice. This is where I realized that projectile weapons are only really useful on slow-moving, stationary, or close targets, as the projectiles move way too slow to be viable from range. So for the flying enemies, you gotta wait till they stop moving, and even then, your projectile may take so long to reach them that they'll probably just start moving again and dodge it inadvertently. This made getting the chalice on this level a real nuisance. The next level is the lake, and it's just a collection of narrow pathways over a giant insta-death pitfall. That being said, if you're not falling off constantly, then it's not too difficult of a level. But it is very irritating how enemies won't spawn unless these wall-mounted eyeballs see you, and they're very slow to notice you too, so it's a real bitch if you want to get the chalice. I ended up in this annoying position where for 20 minutes I was stuck at 80% full on the chalice. Turns out there was one eye that didn't see me. Solid Snake would be very proud. But seriously, why have a gimmick where you can avoid all the enemies if you're just gonna have to fight them all anyway for the chalice? It makes no sense. I'm just glad we're finally done and can move on from this chunk of the game. And the good news is, it's pretty much smooth sailing from here on out. You stop in the Crystal Caves to get the dragon armor, then after that, the Gallows Gauntlet. This is where the infamous firewall I mentioned earlier is. You know, the firewall that's the whole reason we got the dragon armor in the first place. I find it crazy how if hours ago you didn't explore the Cemetery Hill level to find the Witch's Talisman, this is the point in which the game slaps you in the mouth and tells you to go back. You get to a point in the level where there's a firewall and the fake level exit side by side, and if you don't have the dragon armor, you have to go back, find the talisman, redo the pumpkin serpent level and the crystal caves, then come back to the Gallows Gauntlet. This is all assuming you know exactly what you're missing. I got lucky in the beginning. I read in a book that you can use the talisman where you see signs of witches, aka the 2 cauldrons in the game. But if I hadn't read that tiny little bit of info, I would have missed the pumpkin serpent gem, guaranteed. This could be considered progression gating, but it's little things like this that make Medieval feel more like an adventure with twists and turns, as opposed to a gaggle of stages with a straight shot to the end. Eventually, you get to the ghost ship, and this is exactly how a ghost ship level in a game should be, just a rickety amalgamation of rope bridges, magical cannons, and rotting wood. And of course, a crew of reanimated skeleton pirates. Awesome. Most of the pitfalls lead down to the hold, so you just need to run through to get back up again, so that's cool. The only real downside to this level is the boss fight. You just shoot cannons at the captain, who doesn't even really seem to know you're there. It's like he's just carefully pacing back and forth looking for, I don't know, a dropped contact lens or his dementia medication or something. Aside from that, it's a cool level. Obviously just filler, but it's fun filler. Plus, I have a major soft spot for ghost ship levels. The final level, called the Time Device, is such an odd level, and I couldn't place my finger on why for the longest time, but then it clicked. It's a level whose theme is centered around cogs, mechanics, and clocks, in a land where instead of steam power and combustion, we have magical pixie dust and potions. It's just a weird shift in tone, but somehow it still fits with the game. It's odd, but not out of place. There are these doors that have clocks beside them, and you need to take note of what time is on these clocks, then set the big clock to the same time in order to open the doors. This is a really cool gimmick. However, you only use the big clock for 2 doors, and one of those is optional. I really would have liked to see this mechanic expanded upon within the level, but once you get through the Time Device, it's on to Matt's lair. And man, what an adventure it's been. After all the meaningless gargoyle interactions, chalice hunts, bad riddles, pitfalls, and weird boss fights, it's amazing to finally square up against the big bad Zarok himself. And I tell ya, this is a very interesting boss fight. It's broken up into 3 stages. In the first, you're not actually fighting anyone. You place the chalice in the middle of the arena, then these lime green skeletons pop out to fight Matthew's skeleton. Your objective is to keep all your minions alive till they kill all the enemies. The caveat is that to heal them, you sacrifice your own health, so you gotta be careful. Also, the item you need to heal them, called the Good Lightning, is tucked away in a random chest behind you at the entrance. On my first attempt, I killed all my minions with the regular lightning, thinking there was no difference. fights. The second phase has you going toe-to-toe with some dude on a horse. I don't really care who he is, and it doesn't really matter. It's a pretty standard fight. Just hit him and don't get hit. The third phase is against Matt himself. He casts a spell that turns himself into some eldritch abomination goat dragon thing. This fight really came down to the wire for me. We were both one hit from death and I was down to just my copper shield. It was honestly a great fight. Well, it would have been if not for the camera. It just kept wildly swinging around, and throughout the fight, Zarok was hardly on my screen. I had to resort to dash spamming around him at a very close distance till his shields dropped, and hope to God the targeting system would work in time for me to land a hit or two. After beating him, you're treated to an end cutscene that's both funny and bittersweet. Basically, Matt talks a lot of shit and tries to trap Daniel by collapsing and blowing up the time device. In doing so, he actually kills himself.
Defeated. Yet if I am to fail, then all shall perish. You are doomed, Fortescue. You will never leave this domain.
Then Daniel barely escapes Mr. Magoo style, then the birds from the Lord of the Rings save him, plopping him back outside his crypt where he lays down once more. On the way, you see the sun finally rise over Gallowmere, along with the souls Matt stole returning to where they belong. It felt so good to finally beat this game after all these years, and the game did not disappoint. Bravo, Medieval, bravo. At the end of the day, Medieval is a great game, and I can't sing its praises enough. Sure, it has its flaws, but none of which hurt the experience all too much, and I know I've mentioned this a few times already, but the atmosphere and aesthetic of this game is phenomenal. If you're a gamer and a Tim Burton fan, or you just love Halloween, this is the perfect game for you. I'll give Medieval 4.5 out of 5 stars, as the only major issues I have with the game are the running controls, which did become a non-issue once I figured out I could just use the analog stick, and the camera, which for that there is no redemption. The camera can go jump into a vat of old lukewarm mead. Beyond that, Medieval was a joy to play through. The puzzles were interesting and not very tedious, aside from Jack of the Green and the Asylum grounds. And the difficulty spikes, however frustrating, were fair. I'll also praise Medieval for not going overboard with its humor. And don't get me wrong, the jokes flow. Plus the game has an undertone of silliness throughout the whole thing, but you also get a break from the humor to focus on the environments you're in and the horrors you're fighting. But what about all of you? Did you remember Medieval? Is it one of your PS1 essentials? Let me know down in the comments. And of course, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for stopping by and checking me out. I greatly appreciate it. Sometimes it's nice to get away from the hustle of the everyday grind and go back to these very nostalgic bubbles of our lives, before bills, jobs, wives, kids, you know, all that. But with that, I'm out. I gotta cleanse my mind of goat, chicken, lizard, dragon, Matthew. I'll see you in the next one, and have a wonderful day.